If you've been playing StoneAge Idle Adventure for a while, you already know one thing. There are a lot of characters in this game. Cute ones, scary ones, absolute monsters in PvP, and some that just look cool but don't really carry their weight. Since this is an idle RPG where you're constantly upgrading, building teams, and exploring the massive world of Tectonica, choosing the right characters actually matters more than you might think. And when resources are limited, investing in the wrong one can slow your progress big time. So in this video, we're breaking it all down with a complete StoneAge Idle Adventure tier list. I'll rank every character from the absolute must-build powerhouses to the ones you might want to skip for now. Whether you're focused on PvE progression, boss fights, or dominating large-scale PvP battles, this list will help you decide who's truly worth your upgrades and who's just taking up space on your team. Let's get into it. I'm quickly moving on to the video and I'm ranking characters in StoneAge Idle Adventure. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Perugo, Pino, Heaper, Nogon, Azmuna, Moga, Fufutu, Thumper, Mui, Renasif, Beachtoise, Biurbo, Liski, and Tiger Hog. If you've ever invested resources into a pet and then immediately regretted your life choices, welcome to the C tier club. This is the part of the roster where hope exists, but only briefly. Let's talk about the pets that try their best in StoneAge Idle Adventure, but unfortunately just do not survive the meta. First up, Perugo. On paper, Venom Shot looks pretty solid, especially when it connects and spreads damage in an area. You see that splash and think, okay, maybe this is something. But then reality hits. High tier pets counter Perugo way too easily, and deadly venom does not last long enough to matter. By the time the poison starts feeling useful, it is already gone. It is like ordering spicy food and realizing it is barely mild. Then there is Pino. Sleep sounds amazing, right? Putting enemies to sleep so your team can freely hit them feels tactical and smart. The problem is the sleep duration is short, and as the game progresses, enemies just shake it off like it was a light nap. On top of that, Pino does not bring much utility for progression. Early on, it feels clever. Later on, it feels replaceable. Now, let's talk about Heaper. This one hits hard. Heavy damage in the early game actually makes Heaper feel strong during your first push through content. But once you move forward, the cracks start to show. No crowd control, no meaningful utility, and extremely low durability. Heaper is very squishy and can be defeated easily. Big damage is fun, but not when your pet disappears 2 seconds into the fight. Nogon is another one that almost convinces you. Applying bleed damage over time sounds useful, especially since damage over time effects can stack pressure. The issue is that the bleed only lasts 2 seconds. 2 seconds, that is barely enough time to notice it. Without proper crowd control, Nogon struggles in early to mid-game progression, where control tools are absolutely necessary. Now we have Azmuna, the dramatic one. Azmuna deals decent area damage, but it consumes its own health to do it. That means you almost always need a healing unit to keep Azmuna alive in longer fights. Without support, it burns itself out. Even with support, it performs inconsistently and ends up being situational. It is powerful sometimes, awkward most of the time. Let's move to Moga. Moga, or Spicy as some players call it, actually clears grouped enemies pretty well with decent area damage. For early chapters, it feels efficient, but once you progress through the first few guide chapters, the damage starts falling off fast. On top of that, Moga brings zero utility, no control, no buffs that scale, nothing to justify a long-term investment. Fufutu is interesting because summoning swampy soil to damage enemies in an area sounds creative, and technically it works, but that is kind of where the excitement ends. There is no crowd control to support the team, and while Fufutu does provide an attack boost buff, that buff is mostly useful in the early game. Later on, it feels underwhelming compared to what higher tier supports offer. Then we have Thumper. Knocking enemies back and removing one buff from a target is actually a solid utility concept. In early progression, that knockback can buy you time and the buff removal can save a run. The problem is the damage is low, and as fights get tougher, Thumper feels inconsistent. It becomes more of a temporary helper rather than a core team member. Mui is one of those pets that tricks you. In the early game, Mui is genuinely one of the best utility units you can have. It supports your team and helps stabilize fights. But once you unlock higher tier units, Mui gets completely outclassed. the lack of damage becomes a serious issue, and outside of early progression, it is almost unplayable. Now let's look at Ranasif. Healing an ally whose health is lower than 60% sounds clutch, and sometimes it is. But as a support type unit, Ranasif offers no proper crowd control. That is a big weakness. Eventually, you unlock top tier supports that heal better and bring additional utility, and Ranasif quietly gets benched. Burbo actually provides decent crowd control in the early game. For beginners, that control feels impactful. However, the 50% chance to remove a debuff introduces a layer of randomness that you cannot always rely on. When progression becomes harder, you want consistency, not coin flips. Burbo ends up being another early game specialist. Then there is Beach Twas, the team protector. It soaks a portion of the damage taken by allies, which sounds like great defensive utility. The problem is, its health pool is too low to handle massive damage. Without proper upgrades, Beach Twas simply cannot fulfill its tank role effectively. It needs investment just to become usable, and even then, it is not amazing. Tiger Hog has a niche. Reducing the critical hit rate of the target can significantly help during boss fights. That part is actually valuable, but overall, the damage output is lackluster, and as you obtain higher tier units, Tiger Hog gets outclassed quickly. It is a specialist that struggles outside very specific scenarios. Finally, we have Liski. Granting a critical hit rate boost to melee type allies sounds like strong synergy potential. Early on, it feels decent, but just like several others in this tier, the damage falls off after the first few guide chapters. Low health makes Liski vulnerable against stronger enemies, and once tougher content unlocks, it becomes hard to justify keeping Liski on the team. So yeah, C tier is not completely useless, but it is definitely where good intentions go to retire. If you are serious about pushing progression in StoneAge Idle Adventure, these pets might help you start the journey, but they probably will not finish it with you. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Storaros, Stone Crab, Gargon, Banzard, Waris, Spino, Soft Bun, Hog, Veron, Pink Pig, Pakegas, Elodiace, Nordor, Estointagon, and Winloth. Now we are talking. B tier is that awkward middle ground where pets are actually good, but not good enough to carry you to the promised land. These are the solid but replaceable heroes of StoneAge Idle Adventure. They will help you push content, but at some point you are going to look at them and think, you did your best, it is time. Let's start with Storaros. Summoning a wave that deals damage equal to 95% of the caster's attack damage to every enemy in front of it sounds impressive, and honestly, it is pretty satisfying to watch. On top of that, Storaros grants a very useful critical damage boost to allies in formation. The downside, the damage is not consistent enough to stay relevant beyond mid-game. It shines for a while, then slowly fades. Stone Crab is a reliable mid-game companion. It provides strong utility and respectable damage, which makes progression smoother. The critical hit buffs it gives to the team are especially helpful in player versus environment content. However, when you start unlocking stronger range type units, Stone Crab begins to feel like a stepping stone rather than a final destination. Now we have Gargon, and this one hits hard. Targeting a single enemy and dealing 200% of the caster's attack damage is no joke. It also provides useful utilities that are crucial for story progression. The issue is player versus player. Gargon can feel inconsistent there, and when performance depends on reliability, inconsistency becomes a problem. Banzard is actually pretty interesting. It brings utility, like evasion boosts and immunity to knockdown, which are very helpful from early to mid-game. It can even remove debuffs from itself, increasing survivability. The problem is that the buffs do not last long. Without proper upgrades, Banzard struggles to remain viable as content becomes harder. Let's talk about Waris, the steady healer. Waris heals allies every second for up to 3 seconds, which is solid sustain in extended fights. It also grants knockback immunity, improving team stability. However, as a support unit, it does not offer as many utilities as higher tier supports. It keeps your team alive, yes, but it does not bring much else to the table. Spino is the flashy one. Firing a fireball that deals huge area damage and knocks back enemies feels powerful. It also grants melee type allies useful critical hit buffs, which are great in player versus environment scenarios. The problem is utility. Outside of raw damage and those buffs, Spino lacks the tools needed for late game complexity. Then we have Soft Bun, and do not let the cute name fool you. Healing 16% of an ally's health whenever it drops below 80% significantly boosts team survivability. On top of that, Soft Bun grants 2 stacks of barrier to protect against incoming damage. It even provides suppression immunity. Unfortunately, the immunity duration is short, which limits its effectiveness in tougher fights. Winloth is your single target damage specialist. Dealing 155% of attack damage to one enemy makes it a strong duelist. It also protects range-type allies by granting launch immunity, which is surprisingly useful in certain fights. But when it comes to player versus player, the lack of broader utility holds it back. Now let's look at Hog. Knocking back enemies and reducing their defense makes them vulnerable, which is fantastic for team synergy. It is a great support option for early to mid-game progression. However, as you approach late-game content, Hog simply does not offer enough utility to justify keeping it in your main lineup. Veron brings control to the battlefield. Knocking down a target makes them vulnerable to incoming damage, and the self-applied damage taken reduction buffs allow Veron to survive longer in fights. That sounds great early on, but once you progress into mid-game, Veron's impact starts to diminish significantly. Pink Pig is simple but effective at first. Granting a defense boost to allies increases overall durability, which is helpful during early and mid-game stages. The issue is scaling. As you unlock stronger pets with layered mechanics and better synergy, Pink Pig quickly becomes outdated. Now for Pate Gas. Charging forward, dealing massive damage and knocking back the target feels aggressive and impactful. On top of that, applying a damage reduction debuff to the target limits their damage output. It is a strong combination early on. But late game progression demands more utility than just damage and one debuff. Nordor is all about power. Dealing 175% of its attack damage to a single enemy is impressive burst. It also grants a useful speed boost to melee-type allies, making them much more mobile and aggressive. Unfortunately, Nordor peaks early. As fights grow more complex, raw damage alone is not enough. Stonegon is a solid early game crowd control option. Releasing a shockwave gives you battlefield control, and it deals decent damage for an early unit. The catch? There are simply better range type units available later on. Stonegun does its job, but it does not scale well. Finally, Elodiace. Its attacks deal respectable damage, making it useful for clearing early game enemies. Granting an evasion boost to allies also helps with sustain during fights, but compared to higher tier pets, Elodiace offers less overall utility. It is dependable, just not exceptional. That is B tier in a nutshell. These pets are good, some are even very good for a while. But eventually, StoneAge Idle Adventure demands more than pretty solid, and that is when B tier quietly steps aside for the heavy hitters. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Icemanmo, Kiras, Duford, Bartos, Forespion, Osark, Bami, Moonwolf, Galpus, Sunwolf, Tralofo, Kukati, Forest Crab, and Walio. Alright, now we are in the dangerous territory. A tier is where pets start feeling powerful. These are not temporary investments. These are the ones that can carry you through serious content in StoneAge Idle Adventure. They are strong, impactful, and sometimes just one small weakness away from being completely broken. Let's begin with Icemanmo, one of the best tank units in the game. This thing is built like a moving glacier. It gains a shield and can soak an absurd amount of damage. On top of that, it gains knockback immunity, which keeps it from getting pushed around and exposed. It even gains damage block against melee units. The only issue? That protection does not help much against range type units. So yes, it is a wall, but not an invincible one. Next up is Kiras, the reliable strategist. Kiras brings great utility and sustainability, especially in player versus environment content. It can inflict damage reduction on enemies, lowering the enemy team's overall damage output. That is huge for longer fights. However, while Kiras shines in player versus environment, the utility kit feels less impactful in player versus player, where burst and speed often dominate. Now let's talk about Duford, the counter specialist. Reflecting half of the damage dealt by an attacker makes it a nightmare for melee type pets. Watching opponents hurt themselves is always satisfying. Duford can also launch enemies into the air, making them vulnerable to incoming damage. That said, its utilities feel much stronger in player versus player. In player versus environment content, it does not feel nearly as dominant. Bartos is the definition of sturdy. This pet is tanky, beefy, and fits into almost any formation, Bartos can inflict taunt, forcing enemies to target it, and can launch them into the air to make them vulnerable. That combination is fantastic in player versus environment. The downside is that Bartos does not bring enough dynamic utility to truly shine in player versus player battles. Now enter Osark, the close range menace. Osark deals extremely high damage up close by biting an enemy over 3 consecutive attacks. Even better, it restores health when dealing damage, giving it strong sustain in long battles. It thrives in player versus player scenarios. However, because it lacks area damage, it does not perform as well in player versus environment, where clearing multiple enemies quickly is essential. Thespian is all about pressure. It creates a poison area around enemies that deals damage over time based on 50% of the caster's attack damage. The cooldown is low, which means you can keep applying that area pressure constantly. In long fights, that damage stacks up fast. The catch? Meltoy's hard counters it. That makes Thespian powerful but situational. Then we have Moonwolf, and this one is scary. Moonwolf targets enemies with low health within range and executes them with heavy damage. It also inflicts silence, preventing enemies from using abilities. And if that was not enough, it can gain stealth, becoming untargetable for a duration. The only limitation is that gaining stealth becomes difficult if no allies are nearby. Still, in coordinated teams, Moonwolf feels lethal. Bammy brings chaos to the battlefield. By stomping the ground, Bammy deals heavy damage to enemies in front. It can knock down enemies at the furthest range and even grants an attack speed boost to allies, making combo setups smoother. The issue is scaling. While the control and buffs are strong, the overall damage output does not remain competitive in player versus environment content. Now let's look at Galpus. When Galpus initiates Megamorph transformation, it gains buffs to attack damage, defense, and health. That alone is impressive. On top of that, it grants all party members a valuable attack boost, increasing total team damage output. The only thing holding Galpus back is the lack of area damage, which becomes critical in player versus environment stages. Sunwolf is the explosive counterpart to Moonwolf. It deals heavy area damage with claw attacks, making it excellent for clearing grouped enemies. It can also knock back targets and inflict burn damage over time, further increasing its overall output. While it performs decently in player versus player, it does not reach the same impact level as Moonwolf in that mode. Now we have Kukati, a balanced damage dealer. Kukati delivers heavy damage while also offering decent utility. It grants movement speed boosts to melee-type allies, increasing mobility and enabling fast combos. However, even though Kukati hits hard, it does not outperform the very best melee-type pets available in higher tiers. Tralofo focuses heavily on crowd control. Launching enemies into mid-air gives your team a strong advantage for combo setups. It also grants a solid critical hit boost, enhancing overall team damage. The weakness is clear though. In player versus player, the lack of strong personal damage output makes Tralofo less threatening. Forest Crab is a very tactical pick. It launches enemies into the air and blocks healing during that time, making them extremely vulnerable. With upgrades, the recovery block duration increases, which can be devastating in player versus player. However, because its kit is very situational, it is mostly viable in player versus player and less impactful in player versus environment. Finally, Walio. This pet can target an enemy trainer within range and deal massive damage directly to them. That mechanic alone makes it very dangerous in player versus player. It also grants a decent attack boost to allies, increasing overall team output. However, since targeting trainers is mainly relevant in player versus player, Walio is a strong but specialized pick. That is A tier. Powerful, flexible, and often game-changing. They dominate in the right scenarios, but each one has just enough weakness to stop them from ruling absolutely everything. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Holy Knight Bout, Mogoros, Holy Knight Pobai, Kawuga, Braiker, Bluetail, King Kobe, Perutu, Urbos, and Meltoys. Alright, welcome to the big leagues. S tier in StoneAge Idle Adventure is where pets stop being helpful and start being downright broken. These are the units that make you feel unstoppable, the ones you actually build your team around. Let's dive into the cream of the crop. First up, Holy Knight Bout. If tanks had royalty, Bout would be the king. This unit is extremely durable and brings serious utility. It gains a shield for 5 seconds while attacking, letting it soak insane amounts of damage. On top of that, it applies burn on hit. dealing damage over time to enemies. Basically, Bout laughs at damage while slowly roasting anyone who dares touch it. Next is Mogoros, the damage machine. Every time it attacks, Mogoros gains an attack boost, which stacks into massive DPS. It dishes out heavy area of effect damage and comes with utilities that make it invaluable. Plus, when Enraged Mogoros connects, it ignores 35% of enemy defense. That means even the tankiest foes suddenly feel paper thin. Kawuga is the perfect choice if you love single target destruction. Its attacks can silence enemies, shutting down their abilities and leaving them vulnerable. On top of that, it can stun enemies by knocking them down, creating combo opportunities for the rest of your team. Basically, Kawuga makes enemies panic while your team cleans house. Then we have Holy Knight Pobai, a backline menace. Pobai can lunge at enemies in the back of the formation, dealing immense damage capable of outright executing them. It also gains a barrier, blocking incoming damage, and can suppress enemies, leaving them open to follow-up attacks. This pet is pure terror for anyone who thought hiding in the backline would save them. Braiker is all about control. This pet provides strong crowd control and utility, making it a great support in almost any formation. It can knock back enemies, enabling your team to chain combos, and also grants crit hit buffs to allies. Basically, Braiker turns your squad into a well-oiled damage machine. Bluetail is a mix of single target power and tricky control. It can knock down enemies and inflict tempt, forcing them to hit their own team. Bluetail is especially strong in player versus player, giving you the tools to mess with opponents while dealing serious damage. It's one of those pets that just makes fights feel unfair, for the enemy, of course. Next is King Kobe, your AoE powerhouse. This pet dishes out massive area of effect damage, inflicts Scorch for damage over time, and applies explosive lava stacks that detonate for even more damage. To top it off, it boosts allies' attack, increasing overall team damage. If you love wiping groups of enemies with style, King Kobe is your go-to. Parutu is hands down the best support in the game. It heals massively throughout battles, launches enemies into the air, and can apply sleep to make them vulnerable. Pair Parutu with melee units and it grants launch immunity buffs, keeping your heavy hitters safe while dealing consistent damage. It's basically the ultimate team anchor. Urbos is perfect for melee combo setups. It can lunge to the farthest enemy, knock them down, and reduce enemy attack speed. With knockdown immunity, it confidently jumps into the backline without fear of crowd control. Urbos is the pet that not only disrupts enemies but also creates openings for massive team damage. Finally, Meltoise, the sustained legend. Its attacks heal itself, making it excellent for long fights. It also grants deadly venom and knockback immunity to allies, boosting overall team survivability. With its utility and sustain, Meltoise is arguably one of the most versatile and powerful S-rarity pets in the game. Bring it, and you're basically bringing a safety net and a wrecking ball at the same time. S tier is where you feel like a true Stone Age champion. These pets don't just participate, they dominate. If you have them, your battles start feeling a lot less like luck and a lot more like strategy executed perfectly. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.